Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. Emily and I got married before we went west. I've been reading novels since I was 8 years old and knew the West like the back of my hand. One winter, my parents died of the flu, so we got married, sold Mom and Dad's farm, and bought a ranch in Colorado without looking. The seller's letters assured me that it was fertile and profitable. 640 acres of land 20 miles from the city was just what we needed, and after investing almost all the money in the land, we went to our new home. Like all the Wild West heroes I've read a lot about, I knew there were adventures and a pot of gold waiting for us over the next hill. Jake was sitting on a bench in front of the hotel, stretching out his legs and shielding his hat from the hot sun rays. A hotel dog was dozing on the wooden plank floor next to him, whining and, from time to time, twitching from some vivid dog dream. Maybe he was chasing rabbits, and Jake hoped he'd come across a nice, fat, juicy rabbit. Watching the townspeople go about their business, Jake felt like he was having a good time. He's been working at Smith's ranch for the last 3 years. Wars were raging all over Colorado, and Old Man Smith needed protection. For the last 3 years, he's been paying an incredible $150 a month, plus what he's found. Unable to spend money, Jake kept almost all of it in the bank. The war on the distant approaches flared up and then faded, never having begun. But Old Man Smith was still worried. He transferred Jake and the other 2 mercenaries to half pay, giving them time off instead. Rotation meant there were always 2 of them on the ranch. There were constant raids by Indians and robbers, and the ranch was a rich target. But at the same time, Jake received more than twice as much as an ordinary cowboy, and almost 2 weeks off every month to do whatever he wanted. Personally, he thought Old Man Smith was a fool, but he was rich, and it was such an easy job that it would be stupid to argue with him. In his free time, he went to the city, played poker, and relaxed. Maybe he went fishing or hunting from time to time. The wanderlust that plagued him in his early years seemed to be fading, and he began to think about settling down. He just needed the right woman, a small plot, a few cattle and children, someone who will bear his name. He had a reputation as a lightning shooter. Other ranchers were constantly offering him large, almost obscene amounts of money to get his trunk into their hotspot. However, he hated killing, and therefore refused such offers. He had to shoot bad people a lot more often than he wanted to think about it. But that was the West. The vast expanses of the country were still lawless, and there were scoundrels who stole everything they could and killed anyone who got in their way. Then there were people like him. He liked to think of himself as a good guy, someone who offers protection to the weak and vulnerable, for a certain price. A very good price, he chuckled to himself. There was almost $6,000 in the bank, and he had enough money to retire. Maybe he will buy a small estate and get a few cattle and horses to earn money. The ranch cost between $200 and $500 depending on the amount of land, water, and fertility. He had recently looked at a nice place 20 miles from the city, but someone in the east snatched it up before he got the chance. But the plot next to it was put up for sale. It was good land with water and timber, ideal for building a ranch. Even better, the 2 original owners built their homes right on the border of the site, 30 meters from each other. He liked the idea. A sufficient distance for privacy, but close enough for company or general protection if they are attacked. The hot sun was already getting pretty fed up, and feeling a little less full after having just eaten a huge breakfast, he got to his feet. Maybe he'll go into Lincoln's office and make him an offer about the site. He can always sell it later if he decides to do something else. The door of the hotel next to him swung open, and the most stunning woman he had ever seen stepped and stood right in his path on the boardwalk, almost colliding with him. He reached for his hat automatically. Thank God he paid for the bath last night and put on fresh clothes this morning. Ma'am, he lowered his hat respectfully. I'm Jake, and you're Miss... The door swung open again, and a thin young man stumbled out, lost his balance, and crashed into Jake. Used to being bumped into by drunks in the saloon, Jake just pushed him away without looking at him. Looking at the lady, he did not notice how the young man hit the edge of the boardwalk. He waved his arms wildly, trying to catch his balance, and fell backwards into the street, right into a pile of fresh shit. I'm Emily, she replied casually to Jake, watching in horror as her husband tried to return to his starting position before falling. She clamped her knuckle over her mouth, upset by the young man's fall. Oh, Michael, your only clothes, she moaned, making a move to help him. Jake realized that he had stepped into his own pile of shit. It wasn't the best way to introduce myself. Maybe he was her brother or cousin. "Let me help you, ma'am. It's my fault. I shouldn't have pushed him when he bumped into me." Picking up the stunned Michael, it became clear that it would not be possible to dismiss him. The back of his trousers and shirt were smeared with shit. Inspiration hit Jake like a ton of bricks. He looked across the street. There was a row of Myrtle's Milliners, John's bathhouse, and Molly's restaurant. Could things have turned out better? "There's a fashion store over there. Let's go in and buy him some clothes while we clean this one." "We can't afford this, Jake," Emily squeaked. "It's my fault, ma'am. I wouldn't dream of letting you pay." Jake grabbed one of the young teenagers passing by and threw him $1. "Go to the bathhouse and tell them to start preparing the bath. As soon as we find new clothes for this young man, he will come there. Then come back. I'll give you these clothes to take to the Chinese for washing." His eyes widened in disbelief, looking at the whole $1. He had never had so much money at once in his life. Myrtle forced Michael to undress in the backyard, took his measurements, and then sent him to the bathhouse in his underpants. The boy reappeared, his smile almost reaching his ears, when Jake slipped him another $1 to take the dirty clothes to the laundry. After taking care of Michael, Emily wandered around the store, looking at clothes, hats, and shoes. Jake leaned over to Myrtle and whispered to her to take her time making new clothes for Michael. He's willing to pay twice as much if she delays work. Myrtle looked at him strangely. "But money is money," she agreed. Emily stared at the gorgeous dress hanging on the hanger and caressed the soft cotton twill fabric with her fingers. Jake caught her soft whisper. "That's great. Why don't you try it on?" Jake encouraged her. "I can't afford it," she admitted. Myrtle hurried forward looking for a new offer and overheard her. "It's only $3.50. Myrtle grabbed the dress and Emily by the hand and dragged her into the fitting room. "But I can't. Just try it on." Myrtle was on a roll. This day was supposed to be profitable. Dress up a customer in a dress and it will be sold. She saw the look on Emily's face. While Emily was busy, Jake hurried to the next building and quickly paid for the bath, paying extra if they could make it very long. He went to Michael's private room and knocked. "Michael, if you don't mind, it's going to take a while before you take a bath and get ready to get dressed. May I suggest that we escort Emily to the Molly's restaurant next door and treat her to lunch to make up for my rudeness?" The answer was not long in coming, and Michael replied, "That would be very nice of you, Jake. Thank you for all this. Please take care of my wife." "Absolutely. Happy Jehoshaphat, was she married to this little mouse?" Well, that made the game a lot more interesting. Emily wouldn't be the first married woman he'd helped become a fallen woman. Fighting men and their revolvers were irresistible to some women. At the milliner's, Emily was still in the fitting room. "Will a hat and boots go with this dress?" Jake whispered to Myrtle. She nodded enthusiastically. "Just tell her they come with the dress and I'll pay." Jake watched Myrtle take off like a rattlesnake, scared stallion eager to please. She loved the smell of dollars. Myrtle quickly passed the shoes and hat through the door and then disappeared inside. Jake suspected she was helping Emily fasten her dress and lace up her shoes. Millie reappeared and waved her arms in the direction of the dressing room, as if to say, "Get ready, here she comes." Emily walked out, and Jake's heart skipped a beat. She was gorgeous, and the dress looked as if it had been custom-made for her. She was tiny, maybe 5'58". Large cornflower blue eyes with long eyelashes and blonde curls hanging down to his shoulders looked at him from under the hat. Although he couldn't see her feet, the tiny size of the shoes suggested that they were perfect. Her ass also looked perfect. The barely noticeable crease on the dress accentuated the curve of these curves. Emily wasn't a fool. She'd seen enough men staring at her to know what they were thinking. She saw the shocked expression on Jake's face and realized that she must look stunning in this dress. It secretly pleased her, but there was no way they could afford such a purchase. "I can't afford it." "Nonsense," Jake said. "This dress was made for her, wasn't it, Myrtle? I've seen several women try it on, but you, young lady, this dress is for you." "But," Jake raised his hand, "no arguments. We'll take him. I will gladly pay to make amends for my bad behavior today. But," Jake put his finger to her lips, watching as her eyes widened in shock at the fact that a stranger had allowed himself to touch her. "No, just not. You are simply stunning in it, and Michael will really like it. By the way, he suggested that I take you to the Molly restaurant next door and buy lunch. We'll have to wait until Myrtle finishes with the clothes, and the city needs to see this beautiful vision in a new dress. This old cowboy will be puffed up with pride that he can accompany such a beautiful lady to lunch. He took her hand and threw it over his own. We'll be back in an hour or so, Myrtle. Better give me 2 hours, Jake. It's a lot of work, she said, winking at him. On his way out, he grabbed a pair of white gloves, waving them at Myrtle. Jake took Emily's unresisting hand and put on the gloves. Even when he took the wedding rings off her hand so that the glove wouldn't tear and opened her purse to put them in it, Emily didn't say a word. Those gorgeous cornflower blue eyes looked at him with awe. Emily was confused. He didn't do anything wrong, and yet her mind couldn't process it in any way. Emily couldn't resist showing off a little in her new outfit, crossing her arms with this handsome cowboy. He was good-looking, at least 180 centimeters tall, dark hair, muscular body. He was so different from her Michael. Jake looked tanned and toned, while Michael was sallow, hollow-chested, and white as a corpse, or at least as she imagined a corpse to be. She had never seen one. She hoped that living here would help Michael grow into a manly man, like this dangerous-looking cowboy accompanying her. She couldn't shake the feeling of the revolver rubbing against her thigh. She had heard stories of men armed in this way, but it seemed like a fantasy to her. And yet she couldn't deny that there was a man as big as life walking next to her. I wonder if he ever used this revolver. Did he kill with it? At the thought, she felt a slight shudder. Suddenly, she had a brief forbidden vision of Jake making love to her. Something told her that he would not mince like Michael. No, he would passionately take her and make her body sing with desire and need, just like in those vicious, cheap romance novels. In those that the ladies passed on quietly so that their husbands would not see them. She felt her feminine charms moisten at the thought, and blushed slightly at her unholy thoughts. Men bowed their hats to Jake, and women looked at her enviously, admiring her new clothes. Obviously, he was an important person here, and he was treated with respect. Her chin lifted noticeably. She was proud to be seen next to him. He was so gallant and polite, taking more than full responsibility for putting Michael in this pile of shit. A soft chuckle came from nowhere. She remembered the shocked expression on Michael's face, sitting in this pile of shit. Jake looked down at her, smiling as if he knew what she was thinking, and she felt herself blushing again. For the first time in his life, Jake found himself not liking what he saw in the city. A haze of dust hung in the hot air above the street, which was whipped up by all the carts and horses, scurrying back and forth until the earth looked like the finest flour. The slightest breeze blew it apart. The pungent stench of horse shit lying on the street hit his nose, despite the fact that he had been around horses and cows all his life. He found that he didn't like walking here. Everything was covered with a layer of dust, and the thought that her new white gloves might touch anything made him want to protect her. It must be very harmful for women to dress as beautifully as Emily. Perhaps because of this, it is impossible to stay clean for a long time. He had had women before, but for the first time it was different. He felt different. She was a gorgeous lady in her smart dress, and she deserved better. Even though Molly was busy, Jake was served immediately. Charlene, known to everyone as Charlie, put a menu in front of them. Jake glanced at the fly-speckled page and demanded a new one. Clean. Charlie stared at Jake as if he had grown horns, but went anyway and brought them a clean menu. She started to ask Jake why he had returned so soon after breakfast, but the shaking of his head silenced her. Taking off her new gloves, Emily chose, perhaps a child's portion of stew. Jake saw that she was hungry and wondered when she had last eaten. He was familiar with that look. He had been like that for many years. Not all circumstances were as good as they are now. Are you and Michael going to live here? He asked. Yes, we bought a ranch 20 miles south of here. Wilson's place. Yes, but how did you find out? I wanted to buy it, but the land agent told me that some people from the east had deposited money and bought it first. I'm sorry. No need. The land adjacent to you is for sale, and I plan to buy it this afternoon. We'll be neighbors, I'd like that. She was delighted, and then, realizing that she had missed her husband, she added, and Michael too. Well, if you're going to live here, try the steak. The cook copes with this task perfectly. Stew is good, but steak is much better. It's so much food. He shrugged his shoulders. Eat as much as you can, they ordered, and Jake whispered something in Charlie's ear. She returned with a good quality whiskey, filled 2 glasses, and put the bottle down. Oh no, I can't. Jake ignored her protests, raising his glass. To new friends and neighbors. Caught off guard, she couldn't refuse this toast, picking up her glass and drinking it in one gulp as Jake did. Her stomach was empty. The drink almost rose back up, but eventually found its home, settling and warming her stomach. She had never tried alcohol before. While they were waiting for the food, the alcohol entered her body, making her giggle. Emily was looking around the restaurant. Jake couldn't help but notice how dirty everything looked, with flies swarming around the diners. As if hearing Jake, one fly buzzed right into his mouth, just as he opened it to say something to Emily. Jake has eaten a couple of flies in his life. Horses and cattle are constantly shitting, and shit attracts flies. There's nothing you can do. It was a job-related risk. His first reaction was to spit it out, but Emily turned to him. There was no way he would spit in front of her. He grabbed the poured whiskey and tipped the glass down his throat, but the determined fly somehow avoided the flow of whiskey and clung to his palate. The fly's tiny paws tickled him unbearably as it wandered around exploring the surroundings. He tried to crush her with his tongue, but she managed to dodge his efforts until she flew down and landed on his tonsils. Emily turned to say something to Jake, but stopped abruptly when she saw his face. His cheeks were twitching and his eyes looked crazy. Emily thought he might have had a seizure. She had heard of such things. Maybe that's why he didn't have a woman. She saw his eyes suddenly bulge and his cheeks almost slide off his face as Jake couldn't stand the tickling in his tonsils anymore. He coughed loudly, spitting out the poor fly onto the table where it lay upside down in a pool of saliva, and its small paws waved in the air, trying to stand upright. Jake couldn't take his eyes off the fly, as he counted only 5 moving legs instead of the usual 6. Jake didn't know where number 6 had gone, but the thought of where she might be almost made him gag. He didn't want to know. "There are only 5 of them," he whispered in horror. "What? 5 legs, there are only 5 of them," he repeated. "Oh." Stunned by what had happened, Emily and Jake stared down at the struggling fly, and the sudden silence deafened them until she began to giggle. They looked at each other and burst into laughter, tears running down their cheeks. "Was it delicious?" she managed to stammer. The fly finally straightened up and, buzzing indignantly, flew away, seemingly not at all affected by the loss of its leg, and joined its circling brethren in their constant hunt. Emily unwrapped a napkin and wiped the tears from her eyes. "You must be very hungry, Jake." They both burst into helpless laughter and broke down again every time they looked at each other. The people around them began to look at them as if they were crazy. Jake hastily wiped the last of his saliva off the table. The fun had subsided just by the time Charlie arrived with the food. Emily had never seen anything like it. The steak took up almost the entire plate. The rest was lined with a mound of potatoes, carrots, and wild onions. It was all drenched in copious beef gravy. In her opinion, it was enough for 2 people. The smell was divine, and her stomach rumbled with hunger. Jake took a fork of the stew he had ordered, saying he had had a hearty breakfast, and offered her a taste, brazenly suggesting the intimacy of lovers feeding each other. She let him put the food in her mouth and sat there enjoying the taste. "Oh, that's amazing, Jake. And now try the steak," taking advantage of the distraction to fill both glasses. "Oh," she said. "Jake, this is divine. I've never eaten anything so delicious." Jake raised his glass and toasted again. "To good friends." She picked up her glass without hesitation and took a sip. Despite her claims that there was too much food, her plate was clean and she ate a piece of pie. Now they were enjoying cups of real coffee. That's why he loved Molly's restaurant. So much fake coffee made from bread, chicory, or dandelion roots. And this place ordered it from the East and ground the grains itself. It was expensive, but it was worth every penny. At this time, he flirted with her a little. Alcohol made her giggly and receptive. She teased him back, sometimes playfully slapping his hand when he went too far. She once called him a boor, but the wide smile on her lips said otherwise. She enjoyed it herself. Finally, having eaten her fill, her small tummy bulged slightly, and Jake proposed. "Michael won't be finished soon, and I want to settle the issue with the purchase of real estate. Would you like to come with me? The land agent has a huge map of the area on the wall, and you can see where your plot is located. I'll show you where your cabin is. You will also be able to see all the roads, lakes, and streams. This will help you navigate." For a moment, she felt uneasy. It was extremely indecent to rush around the city like this with a strange man. But alcohol and a full stomach after the first good lunch in several days made her decide to take an adventure. Besides, she was having fun for the first time in a long time, and it would be useful to get to know the area better. The map is a great place to start. She nodded. She would like to go. He held out his hand to her, and she didn't resist when he took her new gloves and kissed her fingers before putting them back on. He noticed that she hadn't bothered to put on her wedding rings while they were having lunch at Molly's. He took it as a good sign. Jake went to the Pioneer Western Bank first, and Emily was amazed to see the interior with expensive wood trim in the cash register. The polished wood and gilded metal bars in front of the gate glittered in the light. There was a real glass window at one end. She couldn't even imagine how much that window alone had cost. The bank looked very solid and prosperous. She was even more startled when the manager jumped to his feet and came out to personally greet Jake. "Larry, this is Emily." He turned to her, realizing that he did not know her last name. "Bronson," she prompted. "Oh yes, I've been waiting for you. I received a telegram from your husband, and as I understand it, you bought the Wilson house. Has your husband arrived yet?" "He had a minor accident this morning, and Jake was kind enough to show me around while he cleaned up." "Has our money transfer arrived yet?" "No, did you expect it?" "Yes, this is our money for settling in here." "Well, I can track him. It may take a few days, but we'll find him. These things happen sometimes." "A few days? But we need to pay the hotel bill and we need supplies. And Larry will cover for you during this time, won't he, Larry?" With a meaningful glance at him. "Of course. Please come in and we will issue your bill if your husband can come in later when he feels better and sign the papers." While she was signing the paperwork for the bill, Jake informed Larry that he was buying a plot next to her house. "When Lincoln receives the document, I will tell him to bring it to your safe deposit box, and you can pay him the amount due. It should be about $450. He nodded. "I'll take care of it for you, Jake." When they were done, they shook hands with Larry and left. Jake took her to the land office and introduced her to Emily. "Lincoln, I need a plot next to the Wilson house. How much will he take?" "He's standing firm at $400, Jake." "Okay, that's good. When you register the site, give the documents to Larry and he will pay you." "Okay, Jake. By tomorrow morning it will be yours." Jake led Emily to a large wall map showing the new plots she and Michael had acquired and his plot. He ran his finger along the border of the plot. "Your house is located approximately here and mine is here." "It's very close." "Yes, that's what I liked. Far enough away to retire, but close enough to have neighbors, or if we need to defend our possessions. In addition, there is a cute little pond between us that crosses the boundary of the plot, so it belongs to both of us. You can swim in it." "Can you see him from your cabin?" "Yes," he said, giving her a sly smile. "Bathe. Naked in front of another man," she thought, and blushed. She slapped his hand. He was unbearably bad, but she kind of liked it. Having finished with the land deals, they headed to Emil's dry goods store, where they placed an order for 2 wagons, swampers, handymen, and supplies for tomorrow. Coming back out, Jake reached out and laced his strong fingers with hers. Despite the familiarity, she allowed him this liberty. He was so kind to them. She felt in her gut that Michael had gotten them into a lot of trouble. He got involved in a poker game and foolishly lost all the money they were carrying with them. She was furious about it. The further trip was a real test for them. Thank God they paid in advance for the stagecoach ride, otherwise they would never have gotten here. The conversation at the bank bothered her too. Michael told her that he had transferred the money to them in advance. After a month on the road, she expected them to be waiting for them. Until Jake fed her, she and Michael hadn't eaten in days. They were broke. Larry came out of the bank just as they were passing by. "Mrs. Bronson, I received a telegram with an answer to your question about the money transfer. Your husband completely closed his account in cash, and there was no transfer through our bank. He may have made the transfer via Western Union." "Thanks, Larry," she said with difficulty. Michael was very decisive about transferring money through the bank. He insisted it was safer that way. After he lost their savings in poker, they didn't have anything that would allow them to set up a ranch. How was she going to pay for the groceries and supplies she just ordered? Jake realized that she was upset and took the initiative. "Transfer $100 from my account to hers." "No!" she screamed. "You've already done so much for us." "I just helped a neighbor in trouble. Won't you do the same for me?" Trembling and crying, she nodded. "Come on, let's go find Michael. Maybe it's time to find out the truth." He gave her a minute to take a small handkerchief out of her purse and wipe away her tears, and then took her hand again. Emily looked up at him. "Tell me honestly, Are you helping us or me? Honestly, he said, biting his lip, hating to admit it, to you. Why, you know I'm married, right? I've seen dozens of men like Michael over the years. He is a child. He has the body of a man, but the mind of a child. They have no idea what they are getting into. They only have bizarre, high-flown ideas about what the West is. If the weather, Indians, or wild animals do not get to them, then robbers or hooligans will do it. And almost every one of these idiots left behind a pretty wife in trouble. Every girl who works in the saloon was once a wife who found herself abandoned and ruined here. I couldn't let this happen to you. But you use them. He sighed. Yes, I'm not married and I don't have anyone else, but I always treat them well and pay for the whole night. That way they don't have to sleep with 6 or 10 smelly cowboys to make money. After that, I always give them a good tip, because most of them save money to get out of here and return home. Good tips help them. Sleeping with 6 to 10 men a night? Her face was ashen with shock. She had no idea. It's a hard life, Emily. She eats them up very quickly. They turned around and started walking again. She was curious. So why aren't you married? Until you walked out the door of the hotel this morning, I didn't see a woman who would take my breath away. He was extremely honest. Jake was clearly a fan of hers, Emily thought. This pleased her. Life with Michael was starting to seem pretty bad. Emily stopped Jake and wrapped her arms around his muscular chest, enjoying touching him. To hell with decency. Jake, bless his heart, was at his best in a difficult moment, and although he was attracted to her, he did not ask for anything in return. Thank you for everything you've done, Jake. And if these 10 cowboys were like you, life wouldn't be so bad, she teased him. He hugged her back. It was nice, he said thoughtfully. Let's go find Michael. As if on cue, Michael rushed out of Myrtle's store and spotted them. He waved and ran along the boardwalk, right in Bill's path. Bill was a man with a reputation for passionately hating the greenhorns, newcomers. Over the past year, he has provoked fights and shot 2 strangers, even though they were unarmed. Worse, he got away with it. The few witnesses were too scared by his gun to tell the sheriff the truth. Shit. Jake swore. It was bad. What? What is it? She asked, just in time to see Bill stick out his leg and Michael fly, landing on the ground with a cry of pain. Before he could get up, Bill kicked him in the ribs, which caused another scream of pain. Jake was already moving down the street. Bill was pulling out a revolver, and Jake knew he was going to shoot Michael. Bill, Jake's voice came from the street. Bill raised his head, grinned, and began to raise the revolver in Michael's direction. Emily, with her knuckles in her mouth, terrified by this terrible scene, heard 3 bangs coming so close to each other that they were almost indistinguishable. Jake did it so fast that she barely had time to see his hand. Bill seemed to explode from the inside out. Blood gushed from his mouth like a fountain, joining the growing bloodstains on his shirt, after which the revolver slipped from his limp fingers, and he collapsed to the plank floor. In a daze of shock, she stared at Jake, who stood in the afternoon sun and calmly reloaded his revolver, while loud, piercing screams were heard. She realized that it was Michael screaming over and over like a little girl. The contrast couldn't be much. One was a man, the other a boy. She stuck with a boy. Jake had just shot a man, taken a life, and did it without hesitation to save her worthless husband. Emily's whole feminine essence became sticky, and for the first time in her life she realized that she wanted a man. Jake finally walked up to Michael and punched him in the face several times, telling him to pull himself together. Michael was sitting on the edge of the boardwalk and crying. When the sheriff arrived, Jake told him what had happened, which was confirmed by several witnesses. The sheriff admitted it was self-defense, and it was over. By law, Bill's estate now belonged to Jake. Jake searched Bill's pockets and took his gun. He gave the $50 he found to Emily and the gun to Michael. They'll pick up the horse and saddle from the stable later. You need to learn how to defend yourself before you get killed, Jake told him. We'll start tomorrow when we get to your precinct. Emily had her own questions. Where is all our money? I lost them at that poker game, he admitted, still sniffing. And the bank transfer? I never did it. You're a pathetic piece of shit. You got us into such big trouble. The only thing that saves us is Jake's mercy. He even saved your worthless life. He should have let Bill kill you. She angrily walked up to Jake and brazenly took his hand. Thank you for standing up for Michael. They were sitting on a bench in front of the hotel, while Michael sat sulkily on the boardwalk down the street and drew in the mud with a stick. It took Emily a long time to cool down. She didn't marry Michael for love, after all. After thinking about it, she realized that she had agreed to marry him because at that time she had no other choice. There were few suitable men where they lived. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know whether to thank you for saving his worthless life or kick your ass for not letting Bill shoot him." Suddenly becoming a widow seems quite attractive. Jake laughed. "I'm glad I'm not Michael right now. Besides owning the ranch, he lost all our money in a stupid poker game last week. He lied about the bank transfer. I don't even want to be around him right now." "That's never going to happen." He raised his eyebrows at her. "I'd take pictures of you every night." Her anger evaporated instantly, and she slapped his hand with a giggle. "This is the most indecent but wonderful offer I've ever received, sir. Maybe a more appropriate suggestion would be to have dinner with me. A mile out of town, Martin is having a barn dance, and we could go there and take part in it. It should be fun. There will be many families there. You can get to know them." Emily looked thoughtfully down the boardwalk at Michael, who was sulking and intently drawing with a stick. "Jake, this is not decent at all." But she couldn't help but smile at him to take the edge off her words. She jerked her thumb in Michael's direction. "I don't want to watch him all night. It's Saturday, and the saloons will be full. There are a lot of drunks with guns and a thirst for a fight. The safest place for him is your hotel room. I'll ask the restaurant to send dinner to him. The wagons will be loaded and ready tomorrow. We can go to new places to settle down. I'll spend some time teaching him how to use a weapon. Then maybe he'll survive here." Thinking about Michael made her angry again. She didn't want to be around him right now and had no desire to sit in a hotel room with him tonight. Dinner and dancing with Jake were extremely inappropriate, but they sounded great. Suddenly, she didn't give a damn about propriety. She could have let her hair down, something she had been missing lately. After taking care of Michael and having a good dinner, they went to the stable to get Jake's horse. Emily had never ridden before, so Jake jumped into the saddle, bent down and picked her up with one hand, sitting her sideways in the saddle. Emily was delighted with such strength in a man. She knew for a fact that Michael would never be able to lift her like that. Going to the dance, she felt so safe with him, his arms wrapped around her, holding her in the saddle. His handsome face was next to hers, their warm breath mingling. She felt herself relaxing until their bodies were snuggled up against each other, and the light swaying gait of the horse pressed them against each other. For the first time in a long time, she felt satisfied. There was no doubt about his attraction. At the gathering in the barn, she had a great time learning to dance square dances, square dance, folk dance of the USA, and answered her partner quickly and without mistakes. Everyone greeted her. No one bothered that she came not with her husband, but with another man. There was gossip about today's story. People came up to Jake and thanked him for ridding the city of such a wormy apple as Bill. She has met many people and received several invitations when she settles down. She had a couple of shots of whiskey with Jake, as a result of which she began to giggle and flirt. All the young unmarried girls who approached Jake and asked him to dance seemed to arouse her unkind feelings towards him. She was pleased that Jake respectfully refused them all, and she did the same with any requests. The evening was fun. Everyone danced and had fun until there was a lull. The couples had been slow dancing for the last half hour, and she found herself in Jake's arms, pressed against his body. When dancing, he drew her into a dark corner and allowed himself a kiss. She greeted him and kissed him back, gently exploring each other's lips. During the last dance, they hugged each other tightly, swaying in one place on the dance floor. Emily discreetly undid a few buttons on Jake's shirt and rubbed her face against his chest, enjoying the curly chest hair and warm skin. Taking a deep breath, Emily felt his masculine scent ignite a bonfire between her legs. She was sure that her knickers were soaked through with women's juices. Jake was undoubtedly a man. She had never felt this way with Michael or any other suitor. People began to pack wagons and mount horses to go home. Jake helped her up so that she would sit properly in the saddle this time, and then sat in the back. His arousal was obvious and rubbed against her ass while her feminine buttocks rubbed up and down against the pommel of the saddle. From the light step of the horse, a fire soon broke out between her legs. Once in his arms, she relaxed, pressing her cheek against her face, which was rough from the day's vegetation. Enjoying the new sensations that ran through her body, she closed her eyes, enjoying his masculinity. However, with so many riders and wagons, it was excruciating. "Isn't there a secluded spot here?" Finally, she whispered. "We can take the next trail, but it's 3 times as far." "Fine," she purred. When they were finally out of sight, Jake headed for a familiar meadow. Dismounting, he spread out his camp blankets, and immediately their clothes fell off, until they were both naked in the moonlight, looking hungrily at each other. Her eyes widened when she saw his big, thick, meaty erection. "Oh my God, where are you going to put all this?" "What is it?" she asked anxiously. "Isn't Michael small?" She held up her little finger. "He rubs his little thing on top of me here, and then he squirts his juice on my stomach before you can say Jehoshaphat." "He'll do," he told her, taking her in his arms, and they sank down on the blankets together. She stopped him for a moment. "I've never done this with anyone but Michael. I'm not a woman of easy virtue, so just this once, and don't think badly of me." "Emily, I would never have thought that you were a woman of easy virtue," Jake said soothingly. From the description of Michael's efforts, Jake realized that she had no idea about foreplay. He kissed her for several minutes. A minute later, she was swinging her pale legs in the silvery moonlight, shouting Jake's name at the top of her lungs. It was another woman who was traveling with him to the city. She was wearing only a petticoat. Everything else was packed in saddlebags. She snuggled up to him, wrapped her arms around him, buried her face in the curve of his neck, kissing him gently from time to time. Jake hugged her tightly, and when they drove into town, she didn't move. She didn't care who saw them. She was signaling that she belonged to Jake now. The clerk didn't bat an eye when Jake carried her in half naked in his arms and demanded a room for the newlyweds. There was no sound of protest as the hotel door clicked shut behind them, leaving her husband upstairs, alone, unloved and unwanted. This was what her wedding night was supposed to be like, Emily thought the next morning. Her body was glowing, and her skin tingled with the desire to possess Jake even more. She wondered what had delayed Jake. He left to deliver breakfast and check on Michael. He was gone for quite a long time, and she was aroused again and longed for his love. Upstairs, Jake found Michael beaten to a pulp. His face was bloody and bruised, and his nose was completely flattened. His hands were scratched, and his new clothes were torn. He was lying in bed, barely breathing through his swollen mouth, which was now missing several teeth. Someone has worked hard on it. But it was the smell of stale alcohol coming from his breath that told Jake where to start looking. When he got downstairs, he asked the clerk to send for Doc and asked several people to carry Michael to Doc's small hospital room. Then he went to the saloon. It's time for questions. A group of men were playing poker at a corner table, and upon seeing Jake, Morgan, a professional gambler, threw down his cards and told the others to take a break. "I've been waiting for you, Jake. After you shot Billy because of your friend, I thought you might take what happened to him last night as something personal." Jake sat down, holding his weapon at the ready. He liked Morgan. He played with him many times and considered him an honest man. "What happened?" "Your friend showed up here last night and got into a game with me and some others, claiming he had the funds to play. That's why we let him play and drink on credit. After all, he was your friend. We caught him cheating when he made a huge bet of $50. It was the most clumsy thing I've ever seen. I don't think he's done it before. I won the hand, and when we demanded to pay, he admitted that he had no money. Jake, he was beaten up very badly. A lot of guys would have killed him, but because of you, they only beat him up." Jake thought that was more than fair. For card cheating, people were shot, hanged, even smeared with tar and feathers, and then driven out of the city. He trusted Morgan, that stupid asshole Michael. He was told to stay in his room for his own safety, and here he drinks and cheats at cards, letting people think that Jake supports him. "That's not all," Morgan said grimly. He reached into his vest and took out a piece of paper, unfolded it, and placed it in front of Jake. It was a document for a new ranch issued to Morgan. He gave it to me to get for the bet when they took him to his room. Jake studied the document and was shocked that only Michael was mentioned in it. Emily was not included among the owners of the site. Jake was furious. He wanted only one thing, to find Michael and put a hole in his useless head. Morgan was alarmed to see his growing anger. "Jake, it's not for you, Morgan. I'd like to kill this dumb fool. He deserves it." "So what are we going to do here? A $500 ranch is too much to pay for a $50 bet." Morgan walked over to the bar and picked up a fountain pen and ink. "I like you, Jake. You're one of the good guys. You know how to handle a gun, but you always try to do the right thing, like yesterday when you stopped Billy. I make good money on cards, and I don't need to steal people's property. What's her name?" "Emily. Emily Bronson." Morgan signed the deed in the name of Emily Bronson and handed it to Jake. I understand your frustration, Jake. I would have put a bullet in that idiot's head myself yesterday if I didn't think you'd take it badly. I saw you with his wife yesterday and you looked good together. If she's stupid enough to stay with him, well, he shrugged. I hope she ends up with you. Jake nodded. Me too, thanks for that, Morgan. It means a lot to me. I'll cover for you if you get in trouble and need help. Just let me know. Necessarily. Do you look a little tired, Jake? He couldn't help himself. That woman completely wore me out last night, he confessed. They laughed together. Morgan poured them each a glass of whiskey, and they toasted the consenting women, and then shook hands. Jake went to the doc to see how Michael was doing. Doc said he was badly hurt. His nose and ribs were broken. He needs bed rest and pain relief for the next few days. Jake paid for it and asked Doc to tell Michael that Billy's horse would be waiting for him at the stable when he felt better. Whether Michael could ride a horse or not, Jake didn't care anymore. He could walk 20 miles if he couldn't ride. He went to the stable and arranged to pay for Billy's horse until Michael needed it. The wagons were loaded, and Swampers stood ready at the dry goods store. Knowing that they would drive quite slowly, he told them to just drive. They knew where the old Wilson house was. By the time he returned, Emily was already dressed and worried, wondering if anything had happened to him, especially when he showed up without breakfast, which he left for. He took her to a restaurant to eat. When they were done, he told her what Michael had done last night. So he got drunk, tried to cheat at cards, was beaten up, and then signed a contract to sell our property to pay a $50 bet. Disbelief crept into her distressed voice. She studied the ownership document, noticing that Michael hadn't even included her in it. So this Morgan guy just gave me the ranch? Jake nodded. After finishing her breakfast, she got up. Where is this Morgan? In the saloon. Jake was amazed when she went straight to the saloon, as if women do this every day. He had to admit that she had guts. Jake pointed at Morgan, and Emily walked over to him, took his cards and put them down, spread his arms, and then sat on his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. As a sign of gratitude, she kissed him on the cheek. Come to us anytime, Morgan. There's always food and a bed for you. Thank you for your generosity. Jake noticed a tear roll down Morgan's cheek. Morgan? Just an old memory, Jake. A real old memory, he said with a deep sigh. Since Emily had nothing else to do, she refused to go to Michael. In her opinion, he got what he deserved. They packed up and went to the ranch. Emily rode sideways in the saddle, clinging to Jake, feeling calm and confident in his arms. They passed the wagons halfway, and when they reached the two houses, Jake decided that the wagons were 2 hours behind. They inspected the new living quarters, finding that Jake's were significantly more spacious, with a large bedroom attached to the main room for privacy. The owner left the old bed as a legacy. It was huge and solid. Emily bounced on it a few times, then stood up and took off her dress. There was nothing underneath. She jumped back onto the bed and smiled broadly at Jake. Do you have any ideas, Jake? So it is. Jake filled it once and then greedily returned for a second one. Emily opened her eyes and looked at Jake. It was obvious from his face that he loved her. Say it, she demanded. What? You know, I love you, Emily. And? I want you to marry me. I love you too, Jake. And yes, I will marry you as soon as I can get a divorce from that useless husband of mine. If I can't get a divorce, then if I have to, I'll live with you in sin. After that, when they heard the wagons approaching, they reluctantly got out of bed and set to work unloading. With the help of Swampers, they quickly finished the job, putting everything in Jake's cabin. They were going to live there, and Michael could take another house. The workers were happy when Jake gave them $1 each and they left for the city, leaving the lovers alone in their new home. They put the house in order and sat on the porch, enjoying the silence and the pride of having their own land. This pond looks very tempting, Emily said. Yes? Do you want to? She stood up and took off her clothes. While they were washing, Jake imagined his fantasy of seeing her naked in the pond. After dinner, they cleaned themselves up, blew out the lantern and retired to their bedroom, making love in their new home, and then peacefully fell asleep. They enjoyed a week of making love and getting to know each other better before Michael limped off, barely holding on to the horse. He got another house, despite his protests that Emily was his wife. She told him bluntly that everything was over between them and they were going to divorce. She no longer had the time or patience for a fool like him. Michael stayed here for several months, never deciding to go into cattle breeding, until he heard about the gold rush in a place called Cassiar in northern Canada. He left in order to make a fortune, and no one heard from him anymore. A few months later, Emily got a divorce. The judge accepted her statement that Michael had abandoned her. 5 minutes later, the same judge married her off to Jake. They lived a happy life. Emily gave birth to Jake's 3 children. Jake gave up guns, using them only when necessary to protect his family and land. They have worked hard on their land, turning it into a profitable cattle ranch, and over the years have gained a reputation for being willing to help those in need, especially for wives who were left widowed or without means of livelihood because of an ignorant husband who had no idea about the realities of the West. Jake died at the age of 70, and Emily followed him, not wanting to live another day without her Jake. Their graves overlooked the pond where they spent so much time together, living and making love. One of the memories that their grandchildren still talk about is when Grandpa and Grandma were fighting. Grandma called him a mighty fly hunter, and Grandpa blushed and fell silent. And a little later, they laughed and giggled together over some personal joke. There was a mystery about it, and no one ever found out what it was. And on warm moonlit nights, when mice tremble in their burrows from the cry of a hungry owl, the family swears that you can hear the ghostly splash in the pond water and the breathy whispers of Emily and Jake swearing eternal love. End.